Everybody remembers the teams holding up either the crystal ball of the ADT trophy or now with the current college football playoff national championship trophy. But not everybody remembers the losers, the best teams that never won that national title. Well, a couple months ago, I saw that ESPN's 1045 ESPN over in Baton Rouge posted their list of the top 10 SEC teams that never won a national title. And we're going to break that down and describe what features that team had, and some of the more notable players that were on that specific team. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Lucas Hill here of SEC Unfiltered. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube page, turn on bell notifications that you are notified for every single YouTube video that is posted to keep up with more of us here at SEC Unfiltered. Make sure you follow us everyone on social media, Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok at SEC Unfiltered. Also, check out secunfiltered.com. Check out the podcast version of this episode, as well as check out one of our many articles from our other contributors. This video has been brought to you by our good friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the #1 daily fantasy sports app where you can place your bets on any other player or any team necessary. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com and use code SECU. We'll get yourself a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code SECU over at Prize Picks app or at prizepicks.com. Must be 21 years or older to use. Not available in all states. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. That's 1-800-GAMBLER. So the number 10 team on this list is the 1966 Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, they were technically the national champion according to two different point rating systems, the Berryman and the Sagarin system, but they weren't officially the #1 team in the AP poll. That went to, I believe, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, or it was another team. I'm not sure which one, but this Bama team was awesome. They were a really good team. So, and Vince Lombardi said it best whenever they described the 66 team. He said, I don't know. Are they the best team in the world? He said, I don't know. We haven't played Alabama yet. This was after the Packers won the first Super Bowl. This team was dominant on defense. They shut out 6 opponents during this stretch and from the month of November all the way to January. And this is in the heart of SEC play when they're playing LSU, Auburn, and they played the #6 Nebraska Cornhuskers in the black shirt defense. They shut out 4, and the only team that they gave up points to, Nebraska in the Sugar Bowl, had only 7. This was a team that gave up a total of 41 points all year. That's impressive, and that's in a 11-game season. This was a very dominant Crimson Tide defense. You had Kenny the Snake Stabler. You had Ray Perkins, who was an All-American. You had Cecil Dowdy, an All-American. Richard Cole, All-American. John Calvert, Dickie Thompson. They destroyed every team -1. But they still, which was, of course, Tennessee, came back to defeat them in the Knoxville Rain with an 11-10 victory over at Neyland Stadium. They allowed just 37 points all season, 5 shutouts, 21-0 against LSU, 31-0 against Auburn. But it didn't lead to that coveted three-peat. They were ranked 3rd behind Notre Dame and Michigan State heading into the postseason. So, which kind of sucked because of how dominant this team was. They could have gone down as one of the best teams of all time. Unfortunately, because of that and the way the system was back in the 60s, that never occurred. Coming in at number 9 is the 2001 Florida Gators. Steve Spurrier's last season in Gainesville was one of his best. This was a team that featured still the fun and gun offense. You had Rex Grossman, who went on to be the runner-up in the Heisman Trophy. You had Jabbar Gaffney, who went on to win the Warfield Award and was an All-American that year. He was a very dominant target in Gainesville. had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, was one of the best receivers in all of college football. The only reason he didn't win the Biletnikoff is that they had a guy named Josh Reed that went on to win the Biletnikoff of LSU. Had a record-setting season that year as well. Florida goes into this year, they're the number one team in the nation. They dominate their first 5 games, averaging 48 points a game. They lose to Auburn in Jordan-Hare. Then they dominate the next 4 games. They get back to number 2 in the nation. Sets up for a matchup with Tennessee on December 1st. Now, normally this game will be played in September. Of course, that would be the third Saturday in October, or third Saturday in September. Unfortunately, this led to a 32-34 loss. Tennessee's ground game was just all over this team. This was unbelievable. Travis Stevens went on to go for 226, 2 touchdowns. That Tennessee offensive line really dominated. They got off to a 14-0 start. Florida comes back in the second quarter, scores 20 unanswered. They take the lead late, and this was a game that the Gators were 17.5-point favorites at kickoff. If they win that game, they go to play in the SEC championship. They go play LSU, who they already beat earlier that year. If they win that game, they go play Miami. I don't think they would have beaten Miami that year. We'll just have to see. So Florida drives down the field, the last drive of this game. They score. They get down to go for 2 with literally just under a minute left. Incomplete. Ball game. Tennessee goes on to lose the SEC title to LSU. Their Rose Bowl hopes get died. And then Nebraska comes in that crazy last few weeks that was 2001. But regardless, that was a fantastic team. You had Richie Caldwell, who was a junior. You had Ernest Graham, who was just an unbelievable downhill back. Was a really dominant guy. You had Robert Gillespie, who came in and was kind of that Alvin Kamara type of player. Had 100 carries and as well as 45 catches. You had Taylor Jacobs, who was an outside threat. So the combination of this team arguably would have made this squad one of the best to have ever played. Unfortunately, 2 late losses that came on the last drive of the game effectively ended their chances. They went on to beat down on the top 10 Maryland team that won the ACC, surprisingly, under Ralph Friedgen in his first year. But man, that Steve Spurrier's last year was a heartbreaker. 2007, this is coming in at number 8, the Georgia Bulldogs. Mark Richt's 7th season and arguably his best that he ever put out onto the field. I would say 2012 was also a tight race for them to be a top 10 team that could be on this list. But this was an even better team. You had a rising sophomore in Matthew Stafford. You had Sean Bailey and Muhammad Massaquoi leading the charge. You had Thomas Brown at tailback. You had Danielle Ellerby, who was the leader of the linebackers, and Geno Atkins and Jeff Owens, who were anchoring the defensive line. They start off good, get off to a good start against Oklahoma State. Then they start off 4-2. They end up losing to South Carolina in a game that they didn't score a touchdown, and they get beat down by Tennessee at Neyland Stadium. They did have that thrilling win at Alabama that everybody remembers when Mike Patrick mentioned, "What's Brittany doing with her life?" Then they go to Vanderbilt. They string off 7 consecutive wins. They beat Florida in the cocktail party. Everybody remembers the entire team going out to celebrate. Matthew Stafford emerges throughout this year. You had Thomas Brown, no Sean Marino emerged late in the season. They beat up on Auburn. They beat up on Kentucky. And then they go to the Sugar Bowl against Hawaii, who at the time people were regarding this team as one of the best offenses in all of football. The least amount of points they had scored up to that point was when they played Nevada and only put up 28. They sacked Colt Brennan a lot that year. And they really just took it to this team. They got off to a 41-3 start, pulled all the starters, and then Hawaii scores a touchdown late. So that was really a dominant team that Georgia put out. If they would have beaten South Carolina that year, they would have gone on to play for the SEC title, would have had a crack at LSU, and they would, if they had beaten LSU, they would have been playing Ohio State for the national title. That never came to be. The very next year, this was the same team that eventually led to them being ranked number 1 in the preseason. That never ended up going that way too. Ended up 10-3 the very next year. Coming in at number 7, 2012 Texas A&M. This is an interesting team because I can give you maybe 2 or 3 teams that are better, that deserve to be in this position. But I have no problem with this, honestly. This was year 1 of the Johnny Manziel era. This was a fantastic team. Not only do you have Manziel under center, many people forget this. You had Luke Joeckel and Jake Matthews as your 2 tackles. Both of them went on to be top 10 picks in the NFL draft. You had Mike Evans, who was his favorite target all year. We know what he's doing now in the NFL. You had Ryan Swoop, who doesn't get talked about a lot in Texas A&M football. 2-time all-conference. Remember, this was Texas A&M's first year in the SEC. They were not supposed to do a lot. Everybody was thinking, well, if they, and remember, this was a team that went 7-6 the previous year. They go into their first year in the SEC, and that people are thinking that they're a joke. They start off rough. They go 0-1, lose to Florida in a heartbreaker. Then the Manziel mania happens. They beat up on SMU. They end up going to Louisiana Tech at Independence Stadium. They get into a shootout. Many people don't remember about that game. Louisiana Tech was ranked. They were a fantastic football team. 59-57, by the way. Then they lose to LSU at home. If they don't lose to LSU, they go to the SEC title. Then the Alabama game happens. And everybody remembers the play that Johnny Manziel made where he initially loses control of the football, catches it in the air, and throws a touchdown to, I think, Swoop. That really catapulted him to the top of the Heisman rankings and brought him to superstar status. It was year 1 of the Kevin Sumlin era. They bring on Mark Snyder as your defensive coordinator. You bring in Cliff Kingsbury, and we know where he's at right now. That was a fantastic team. Not only that, you had DeShazer Everett, who was a fantastic defensive back for a very long time. Spent 6 years in the NFL. Unfortunately, he was released because of a car crash that led to the death of his girlfriend. So that was a fantastic team for Texas A&M. In year 1 in the SEC, not many teams were supposed to do good. A&M surprised the world when they knocked off Alabama that year. And they competed in the SEC and really set the standard for what they thought was expected to come within the coming years. But now look at where Texas A&M is at right now. Coming in at number 6, the 2023 Georgia Bulldogs. Last year, Georgia dominated. They really had their hands full. Obviously, having to replace a lot of starters on the defensive side of the ball. But you bring in a brand new quarterback, a brand new rushing attack, and they do fantastic. They end up starting off the season, I think, 12-0. End up losing to Alabama in the SEC title. Should have had an opportunity to play for for a college football playoff, had a better strength of schedule than Florida State's and many other teams that made the playoff. But unfortunately, they end up going to Hard Rock Stadium and basically play a scout team and put up 63 on Florida State. That was a good Georgia team last year, who's obviously going to have to replace a lot of big-time guys. You lose Ladd McConkey. You lost Brock Bowers. You had the best defense with Malachi Starks, with Michael Williams, with Jamon Dumas-Johnson, with Nazir Stackhouse. And this team is just going to get better this year. Those guys, except with the exception of McConkey and Bowers, they're back. You also bring back Carson Beck. You bring back Dominic Lovett. But if they go on and beat Alabama, they have a better opportunity against Michigan or maybe even against a Texas team if they're ranked that high. So I think Georgia would have beaten Michigan handily. I think that the mantra about Jim Harbaugh may have continued. I think Jim Harbaugh would have stayed at Michigan even if he had lost to Georgia, and I think Georgia would have gone on to a three-peat. I guess we'll never know. Coming in at the top 6, I think we're in the either top 5 or top 6. We have the 2004 Auburn Tigers. Sorry, this is number 5. 2004 was an interesting year in college football. This is the year that follows the split national title between LSU and USC, and everybody was saying that the BCS was going to help eliminate the split titles. Well, last year, that was not the case. Tommy Tuberville was coming into this year in 2003 with his butt on fire. That was a team that he was on the hot seat going into this one. Al Borges comes in from Indiana. They bring Auburn to the I formation, and they focus on the run game. You have Carlos Rogers as the defensive back, who went on to be a Pro Bowl defensive back. You had the backfield tandem of Cadillac Williams and Ronnie Brown, who both went combined for over 2,000 yards that year. Auburn starts that year off at 17th. They get a big signature win against LSU at Jordan-Hare. They finish the season undefeated. They beat Tennessee in the SEC title, and they get left out of the BCS National Championship, which really started the debate about whether or not there should be a college football playoff. Of course, that wouldn't come into play until 10 years later. That Auburn team was very good. You had Jason Campbell leading the charge. He went on to be a first-round draft pick. You had 2 great offensive lines in Marcus McNeil and Ben Grubb. You had Jay Ratliff, who would man the interior. That was an overall great roster of talent. They really had a good team that year. And it's sad that Auburn never got to display that in 2004 against teams like Oklahoma and USC. I don't know if they would have beaten USC, but it certainly would have been better than 55-19 in the national title game. Number 4, at the time, this team was supposed to be going into the Fiesta Bowl in 96. Florida was expected to run all over Nebraska. They were at Sun Devil Stadium. They weren't on turf. They were on natural grass. Florida had played on natural grass and were dominant while playing there. And this was a team that was averaging close to 40 points a game. It's the 95 Gators. The Gators start off the year at number 5 in the nation. They have that unbelievable game against Tennessee in which I think both teams went almost 1,000 yards combined. The epic duel between Danny Warfel and Peyton Manning. You beat Auburn at home or on the road. You beat Florida State at home. You played 3 top 10 teams. You beat them by double digits each time. You win the SEC, and then you go play Nebraska. That was a dang good team in Nebraska. You had Tommy Frazier. You had Lawrence Phillips. You had Grant Wistrom. That Gators team was unbelievable. You had Rydell Anthony, who the very next year would go on to be a All-American. You had Chris Doering. You had Travis McGriff. You had Jack Jackson, Jacquez Green. Fred Taylor was a sophomore at the time. And on the defensive side of the ball, you had Sammy McCorkle. You had Lawrence Wright, Mark Campbell, all who went on to have pro careers. And the joke, and Florida started off that national title. They got off to a 10-6 start. Then Nebraska exploded. Went off for 29 consecutive points in the second quarter. Tommy Frazier runs for almost 200 yards. And that was it. Florida struggles against the blitz. Warfel throws 3 interceptions during that game. But the very next year, they go on to win the national title. But you think about what could have been if that Florida team would have been able to handle the blitz of Nebraska, and if they would have been able to counter off of all of that. Coming in at number 3 is the 2018 Alabama Crimson Tide. It's year 1 of the Tua Tagovailoa era. He's taken over for Jalen Hurts, who struggled last year. This quarterback class was unbelievable for Alabama. Not only do you have Tua and Jalen Hurts, Mac Jones was a redshirt freshman during that year. The running back room was awesome. You had Brian Robinson, Damian Harris, Jerome Ford, Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs. Oh my gosh, this was just an unbelievable team. And the wide receiver group, Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Heisman Trophy winner, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle. Holy cow. The tight end room, you had Irv Smith Jr., who went on to be a first-round pick with the Minnesota Vikings. Or excuse me, a second-round pick. He had first-round grades, though. And he was a guy that was supposed to take over for O.J. Howard, who was fantastic all around. This offensive line was awesome. You had Lester Cotton, Deontay Brown, Ross Piercebacher, Alex Leatherwood, and 2 first-round picks in Jonah Williams and, of course, Leatherwood. Defense was awesome. Isaiah Buggs, Christian Barmore, Quinnen Williams, Raekwon Davis, Josh Jobe, Trevon Diggs, Patrick Surtain, who was a freshman, Anthony Jennings, Dylan Moses, Mac Wilson, Cameron Latu, who ended up converting to tight end later on in his career, and Chris Allen. I mean, you can't get any better than that. They were the number 1 team all year. They dominate LSU at Tiger Stadium, shut them out. You dominate Texas A&M at home. They dominated Mississippi State. Had a come-from-behind win against Georgia when Jalen Hurts came into the game into the fourth quarter when Tua went down with an injury. You beat up on Oklahoma. And then the college football playoff national title comes. Remember, this was, I think, the 3rd or 4th matchup between Clemson and Alabama. This was supposed to be a very good one, too. It's supposed to be close, just like 2015 and 16's national titles. Clemson ran away with it after the first play of the game. Starts off with a pick 6 by A.J. Terrell. And Alabama just never could get off the ground running after that. They actually, going into this before the half, Clemson was down 16-14 at one point. And then Clemson proceeded to score 30 unanswered from the second quarter until the third. Alabama never could recover. Tua throws 2 interceptions during the day. Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence have big games. Justin Ross has his breakout game. You think about how good that Bama team was in 18 and how that was just another missed opportunity for Nick Saban and company to claim another national title. 2016, though, was even better for Alabama as they come in at number 2 on this list. They're coming off of another national title. They're the best team in all of college football right now. I believe they're coming in on I want to say 10-game win streak. Nope, 12-game win streak. Just looked at the end of the 2015 season. They end up stringing off 26 consecutive wins from after that Ole Miss game in 2015 all the way to the national title game. So they didn't lose a game for about a year and a half. They beat up on Ole Miss, who they lost back-to-back years in a shootout, 48-43. They dominate USC in the Advocare Classic after USC came out hot in their intro. They beat up on Arkansas. That was a fun game to watch. They played Tennessee, who was a top 10 team, beat them by 39. Played Texas A&M, who was supposed to be a very good team, beat them by almost 20. Got a close one with LSU. That was a 0-0 game all the way up until that fourth quarter. Ended up scoring 10 points and won 10-0. Their last 3 games beat up number 13 Auburn by 18, put 54 on Florida, beat Washington, who had a very good team that year with Jake Browning and the fastest man before Xavier Worthy this past year. That would be John Ross, and a very good defense that Washington put out on the field. But they go to the college football playoff national title that year. They're the favorites. They're the 6.5-point favorites. That was a fantastic one. You had Calvin Ridley. You had Cam Robinson. You had Jonah Williams, Ross Piercebacher, Bradley Bozeman, O.J. Howard, Ardarius Stewart, of course, Jalen Hurts, Bo Scarborough. Defense was even better. Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Dalvin Tomlinson, Tony Brown, Ryan Anderson, Rashaan Evans, Reuben Foster, Anthony Averett, Marlon Humphrey, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Ronnie Harrison. All of these guys were so dominant. Get off to a 10-point lead going into the third quarter. Clemson comes back. They beat them on that miraculous last-second touchdown from Deshaun to the former walk-on Hunter Renfrow. That Bama team should have gone down as the first 15-0 team ever. But late-game magic happens for Deshaun Watson, and history turns the tides for the Clemson Tigers, which starts off an unbelievable rivalry. And the number 1 team that had never won that coveted national title, the 2011 LSU Tigers. Let me just lift off some of the names that are on this team. Let's start off with Eric Reed, first-round pick. Morris Claiborne won the Jim Thorpe Award, first-round pick. Barkevius Mingo, first-round pick. You had Michael Brockers, who's still in the NFL. You have Kevin Minter, almost a 10-year vet in the NFL. Sam Montgomery, who's still in the league. You have Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger. And you think about some of the other guys that weren't even starters during that year. You had Jamaria Rasco, who went on to have a nice little career in the NFL. You had Ego Ferguson, who spent 4 years in the league. Now, when you look at the offensive side of the ball, you don't see a lot of big-time guys. You had Odell Beckham, who was a freshman starting. You had Ruben Randall, who went on to be a second-round pick. Number 1 wide receiver in the league. Didn't pan out to where most experts wanted him to be. Jarvis Landry wasn't starting. You had Russell Shepard, who went on to spend 6 years in the league. The biggest problem, though, was the quarterback position. Split between Jarrett Lee and Jordan Jefferson. Jarrett Lee came from a one-back offense where you didn't pass a whole lot during the season. At best, you were getting maybe 10, 15 throws a game. Now, 2011 was actually his best year. He started in 2008 and was named pick 6. Threw 7 interceptions that were returned for touchdowns. But 2011 was a better year for him. Again, didn't throw the ball as much. 1,300 yards, 14 scores, 3 interceptions. That was the trend for a lot of LSU quarterbacks before Joe Burrow and Danny Etling came to Baton Rouge. Jefferson was not as good. 2011, 737 passing yards, 81% and QB rating, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He was a dual threat quarterback. But the defense was good enough to help LSU get to a start where they were 13-0 going into the national title. They beat up a lot of teams. They had the famous game of the century, 9-6 between LSU and Alabama. That was a fun game. And it was, you had the players in the game were basically Drew Alamon and guys like Jeremy Shelley and Cade Foster. The biggest weakness, I will say, from the Nick Saban era was special teams, specifically kickers. It cost them a couple games. It cost them this game. It cost them the Iron Bowl in 2013, and it cost them a couple of more games in 2019. Regardless, 2011 was an unbelievable year for LSU. They beat Geno Smith and West Virginia in Morgantown. They played a good Oregon team the very first game and put up 40 on them. I already mentioned the game of the century. They played a top 3 Arkansas team, beat them 41-17. Played Georgia, got down 10-0, put up 42 unanswered on them. The Honey Badger was an All-American. You had Mo Claiborne, like I already mentioned. And then the 2012 BCS title game happens. If you take out everything else, this is the best team that has ever that LSU has put on the field. But because of how bad this offense was, they put up zilch in all of college football. Yes, they were number 1 in scoring offense and second in the nation in total defense. But most of that was because of how good the defense was. LSU didn't even get past the 50-yard line only once. They had 4 first downs ever that entire game. They had 92 yards of total offense, and Alabama dominated the time of possession. As good as this LSU team was, sadly, they just couldn't get it done at the end of the day because of how bad this offense was and how bad the system was. Did I miss any teams? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Make sure you turn on bell notifications, subscribe to our YouTube page so that you are updated for every video from SEC Unfiltered. But till next time, I'm Lucas Hill. See ya.